Hey everyone, Dom here, welcome back to the channel. It's been a little while since I did a book tag, so I wanted to do one today that takes a closer look at my TBR and how I manage it. So I saw Megan from Megan's Reading Revelations do this tag a few days ago, and I thought I quite liked the idea of it, taking a look at my TBR, how it's managed, how I decide what to read next, and a few of the different titles under a few different prompts that are actually on my TBR itself. This was originally 11 questions, but I've changed it around a little bit because there's 2 in a row where I've got the same answer, and there's also a couple that overlap, so I've just combined them into the one question. This is just going to be a quick fire look at some of the books that are on my TBR though, and a little overview of some of the other specifics of that list as well. So question 1, and this is one of the questions that I've combined with the original question 11. Question 1 is my TBR mostly physical or mostly ebook? The original question 11 was looking at the numbers as well, of how many books are actually on my TBR. So first of all, I've said this in many of my videos that I'm a mood reader, so I don't strictly speaking have a TBR in terms of which book I'm going to read next in any order of them or anything along those lines. For me, it's more as it's phrased on Goodreads, the want to read. There's no real timescale on these are just a bunch of books that I want to read. So I've gone through for this question and kind of for this tag overall today, I've gone through and looked at the books that are on my want to read list that I actively do want to read. I've recently pruned that list as well to take off some of the titles that have been on there for a long time that I'm just never going to get round to. I don't have a copy of them, and they were just put on there to keep them in my mind when I came across the books originally, which in many cases is several years ago. So to go back to the actual question or questions, my kind of active TBR is mostly made up of ebooks. I've got 28 titles that I've included in this list as compared to 23 physical copies. Now when I say active list and the titles that I'm including in this, I do have several both in ebook and physical format where I've got more than one book in a series which is making up one of the titles on my TBR. So I've only included the first title from those. Even if it's a series where I know that I will be reading the additional books, the later books in the series, I've only included the first one for parity between all of the different series, because there are some of them where I might read the first book, not like it, and then decide to move the rest of them off my TBR. Question 2 is how do I determine which book to take off my TBR and read next? So again, going back, I'm a mood reader, so that one is kind of a difficult question because for me it is almost always what takes my fancy at the time. There are a few exceptions where I've got advanced review copies that I prioritise because there's kind of a deadline for reading them, because I want to release my review in time for the launch of the book itself. And there's also occasionally some buddy reads that I do where I actually schedule in a particular month, or in some cases even a week, that I'm going to look at reading them. Outside of that though, it's literally a case of I'll finish one book, or sometimes when I'm close to finishing a book, I will start to get an idea of what I want to read next. What am I in the mood for? What's really singing to me at the time? And that's the key deciding factor for me. Question 3 is a book that's been on my TBR the longest, and this one will be Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson. I've mentioned this one several times in my videos specifically because it has been on my TBR for quite a long time, and I keep saying that I'm going to get to reading Words of Radiance, and so far I haven't. I have scheduled it in. I'm looking at reading this in the next couple of months, so fingers crossed we'll actually cross it off the list. With this one though, I read The Way of Kings. It was in 2011, 2012 I think, I'm not entirely sure, but I started tracking my reads as I read them on Goodreads in 2013, and it was before then. So we're talking a good 7 or 8 years potentially that this one has been on my list. Question 4 is a book that I've recently added to my TBR. So as I've said, the way I manage my TBR is more of a want to read list, so I do add titles to it quite frequently, even if it's not a kind of a physical or even digital TBR where I've actually picked up a copy of the book. One of the most recent titles that I have added though is one that I did pick up the ebook of because it was a free ebook the last couple of days. By the time this video comes out, it will have gone back up to whatever price it's set to. And this is The Hellborn King by Christopher G. Brenning. The rough synopsis, or at least part of the synopsis of that is after the massacre of his people, Damien Dreadfire leads a patchwork army of unlikely allies against the kingdom of Batanthia. The alliance teeters on the edge of a knife as old rivalries between clans threaten to tear it apart. With the help of his trusted friend Einar and a strange mystic, Damien launches a bold offensive that will decide the future of the Free Lands. Short on time and even shorter on men, the fate of a once vibrant culture and its people rests on the outcome of the next battle. There's a second part of the synopsis as well, which looks like the story will also focus on kind of the opposite side of this great battle, so Damien Dreadfire's enemy, I suppose, and that's quite interesting because I do like when you get to see a bit of both sides and maybe have a bit of a point of view look at one of the bad guys, so to speak, as well as the traditional good guys that we're reading of. So that'll be interesting. I've got a couple of friends who are reading this at the moment and are really singing its praises, so I'm hoping that I'm going to enjoy it as well. Question 5 is a book that's on my TBR strictly because of its beautiful cover, and although I don't tend to cover buy as far as books go, I won't buy a book because of its cover. I will make sure that I'm going to enjoy the book first, so it needs to at least sound like a good read for me. But in terms of my kind of want to read, I will sometimes put a title on there because of the cover really appealing to me, and then I'll look at it in closer detail at a later date. So there are a couple that I have put on there because of the cover, but also because I've taken a look and it sounds quite interesting. Two that spring to mind are Queens of the Weird by Tamandra Whitecastle and Beckoning at the Gate by Benjamin Ryan, I think it is. And these two I do like the look of. I've got a copy on my Kindle of Queens of the Weird, and I think originally when I downloaded this from Amazon it did have the old cover, which I don't really like too much. There's not a lot in there that sings to me, but the updated cover definitely does. Even if there's two different designs in terms of the text on it, I've got one which just has kind of not necessarily plain text, but it's a specific font as opposed to kind of a stylized script, which really goes well with the image, I think. For Queens of the Weird though, half-giant Lovis and her shield maiden warband were once among the fiercest warriors in Midgard. Those days are long past now, and Lovis just wants to provide a safe home for herself and her daughter. That is until her former shield sister Solvig shows up on her doorstep with shattering news. Solvig's warrior daughter is trapped on the plains of Vigrid in a siege gone ugly. Desperate to rescue her, Sol is trying to get the old warband back together again, but their glory days are a distant memory. The shield maidens are shield mothers now, entangled in domestic obligations and ancient rivalries. But family is everything, and Lovis was never more at home than at her shield sister's side. The road won't be easy, old debts must be paid, wrongs must be righted, and the Nornir are always pulling on loose threads, leaving the shield maidens facing the end of all 9 realms. Ragnarok is coming, and if the shield maidens can't stop it, Lovis will lose everything she loves. That sounds pretty cool to me. I do like the idea of shield mothers, and I've also got, as we'll see in a moment, I've also got Kings of the Wild on my TBR, and this is one that shares a similar story, at least in one of the key aspects of it. So I am tempted to read those two titles back to back and kind of see how they compare, looking at a similar idea from a very different viewpoint. The Beckoning of the Gate, it was Benjamin J. Ryan, and this one says the only life Sanfa Lagafin has ever known has become her prison. Whispers of a scandal have turned to accusations of murder, and fingers are pointing her way. Feeling powerless and alone, she yearns for escape. When Sanfa stumbles upon a small rusted key in a forest near her home, it seems her silent pleas have been answered. Awakened by her touch, the key demands to be heard, and she's not the only one who heeds its call. Thrust into a world only glimpsed in the stories of her childhood of fairies and princes and eldritch magic, Sanfa sets out to unlock its secrets, but uncovering truth has its own perils, and as the key's influence grows, she'll be left with a choice: survival or sacrifice. But will it truly be hers to make? All the while in the north something ancient stirs, a great power that could unravel the very threads of existence. So that one does sound pretty cool as well, and when I shared this cover in Discord, several people were pointing out the little animal companion on there, because I know that's something that a lot of people really look to and enjoy in their fantasy. So I'm quite interested to see how this one pans out, and if that is a traditional animal companion, and how that impacts the story. Question 6 is a book on my TBR that I never plan to read. This one I don't really have an answer to. I've kind of touched on this earlier on, but I occasionally prune my kind of want to read list and remove some of those titles that I added just to keep in my head, and then remove because I decided that I just wasn't going to get round to them. I didn't really want to read them, I guess, in that sense, because if I did, they would have stuck with me, or, you know, I would have just picked them up and actually read them. So although I don't really have an answer, a couple of titles that I have done that with, Gideon the Ninth is probably the one that really stands out to me, because loads of people were really kind of raving about this book, and it really brought it to my attention and I wanted to read it. But as I looked more into it, I decided that I'm not sure that it's going to be a book for me, and eventually I did remove it from my kind of want to read list. Question 7 is an unpublished book that's on my TBR that I really want to read. I do have 4 of these. The key one of those for me, the one I'm choosing as the answer, is Bonds of Chaos, which is book 3 of Threadlight by Zach Argyle. I've chosen this one over the other 3 purely because it's the end of a series. It's book 3 of a trilogy, so I'm really eager to read this one. It's slated for release, I think maybe the 25th of August, might be wrong, but it's certainly slated for release around end of August this year, so hopefully I'll be getting my hands on that, enjoying it, closing down the series and adding it to one of my top series of fantasy. The other titles that are coming out this year, or hopefully coming out this year, that I'm really looking forward to, we've got Hunger of the Gods by John Gwynne, book 2 of The Bloodsworn. We have Of War and Ruin, which is book 3 of The Bound and the Broken by Ryan Cahill. And we have the as yet untitled, or as far as I'm aware untitled, follow-up to Illborn, book 2 in the Illborn saga by Daniel T. Jackson. So question 8 is a book on my TBR that basically everyone has read except for me. And question 9, which I'm going to combine my answers to with this one, is a book on my TBR that everyone recommends to me. I'm combining these because they are the same title, and that is Kings of the World by Nicholas Eames. I've had so many people, it's not necessarily they're recommending it to me kind of out of the blue, but it's more along the lines of when I go looking for recommendations, or when I mention that Kings of the World is on my list, the kind of outpouring of people who come along and say, yes, Kings of the World, that's a great book, is probably greater than I've seen for any other title that either I've talked about or I've seen other people talking about. So although it's been on my list for quite a while, I do now have a copy of it, which means that it has moved up my list because I'm trying to certainly move through my physical TBR, but more than that, this one was a gift. I recently received it for Christmas from a good friend, so I'm looking at reading through all of the gift copies that have been given to me as kind of priority over copies that I've bought for myself. And then question 10 is a book on my TBR that I'm dying to read, and I don't generally have too many of these because if I'm dying to read them, then I do actually read them. They kind of, being a mood reader, they take precedence over the others, and I just slide them in a little bit higher up the list, so to speak. So despite that, I do have 2 that I'm going to talk about here, one of which is a buddy read which I've got scheduled for February, so I will be reading this one very soon, and that is Cold from the North by D.W. Ross. This title I'm not going to talk too much about because I am going to be reading it shortly. I did cover it in my recent December book haul, and I read a bit about the synopsis there, and I will talk about it obviously in a lot more detail once I've read it and I'm looking at reviewing this self-published book. The second of these titles though is Dragon Mage by M.L. Spencer. This is another title that I featured in one of my book hauls when I got it in June of last year, so this one has been on my list for a little bit longer than kind of the 6-7 months since June, but I will be getting to Dragon Mage shortly. Dragon Mage follows Aram. Aram Wraith has the power to challenge the gods, he just doesn't know it yet. Unknown to him, Aram bears within him a gift so old and rare that many people would kill him for it, and there are others who would twist him and use him for their own sinister purposes. These magics are so potent that Aram earns a place at an academy for warrior mages, training to earn themselves the greatest place of honour among the armies of men, dragon riders. Aram will have to fight for respect by becoming not just a dragon rider, but a champion, the calibre of mage that hasn't existed in the world for hundreds of years, and the land needs a champion because when a dark god out of ancient myth arises to threaten the world of magic, it's Aram the world will turn to in its hour of need. So I've heard lots about this one, and I think initially I was hearing lots about it because of that beautiful cover art. And now I've got a few more of my friends who've actually read this title, and they're reporting back that the book inside, the book underneath that jacket, is every bit as good as the cover itself. So I'm really looking forward to this one, and we'll be hoping to read it in the next month or two. So that's a closer look at my TBR and some of the titles that are on it and some of the different ways that I organise or manage my list as well. How about you? What do you do for your TBR? What have you got on there that you're really looking forward to read but you haven't had the opportunity to yet? As always, I'm really interested to hear your thoughts because as much as anything, I might pick up some more recommendations for myself from your lists. That's me done for today though, so same as always, you'll find all of my social media links, my Ko-fi page, my Amazon wishlist down in the description box below. Check them out if you do want to. Hit the like and subscribe buttons if you haven't already done so, and if you appreciate the content that I'm putting out. I'll hopefully see you again soon, but until then, as always, take care of yourselves, read some good books. Bye for now.